Hello everyone! Finally we came to the Antonio Faustino Temple. This is a gorgeous example preserved in good condition. Once it was an ancient temple of some god, but now it has been rebuilt into a Catholic church. We see that the staircase has been completed. Naturally, it was not here in the original. The temple stands on a powerful travertine foundation. The Foramana passes right here. And here on this side, we also see travertine. As in the Colosseum, all the metal was removed, only the walls remained. Surprisingly, they are still standing. Apparently, during the War of the Gods, this temple was practically not damaged, but suffered from people. The Romans repaired it with bricks and, after the flood, rebuilt it. The original roof, of course, unfortunately hasn't survived. Even above the portico, nothing was restored here. Only above the temple itself was restored. But it is not the only structure that remains from those times. Here, for example, are some more ruins. Now it's called the Foro di Nerva. Of course, it's unknown what it was called then. We see arches like in the Colosseum. Also, the shape of the walls is somehow curved, and it's difficult to guess what was here. Unfortunately, it's also impossible to get closer. But we can see that the structure was also obviously held together with metal, since the metal miners had already taken out everything that was here. Now I'll come from the other side. By the way, for clarity, it's clearly visible that this road level became the ground level after the flood. There were buildings, roads, people lived here, and they had absolutely no idea that these columns were half buried underneath them. But in fact, there's practically nothing left here. Strange structures. Here's some arch structure which laid from the inside. Perhaps there are still some donjons there. But for now, the archaeological works here is finished. Farther on our way is Foro di Augusto, another structure made of powerful walls. Now, by the way, this back wall also serves as a retaining wall for the streets behind. So we can say, thanks to this, it has survived. In general, apparently, there were very massive temple buildings here. Perhaps some residential complexes, but we can see that they were rebuilt and completed by the Romans. The Romans repaired these columns here with bricks and put these marble steps on their Roman concrete. But all of this couldn't withstand the flood and was demolished. The columns were certainly impressive here, and later people used these buildings as housing. We can see on the left a house standing right on the ruins, using the walls of this building. Below we see some elements of the ceiling. They dug it up, but everything is already so destroyed, plundered, it's even scary to look at. In general, the Romans had so many gods that it's not surprising that they had their own temple for each god in Rome, and each temple was quite large. And of course, it was necessary to glorify each god so that no one of them would be offended, because the gods lived in Olympus and could become angry if people, let's say, didn't honor them enough. There were many gods. They knew them not only by name, they also knew their genealogies, who had what kind of relationship among them. Because for the ancient Romans, these were not some kind of religious teachings. These were their specific rulers. They lived in their times, so they knew them and revered each one. And this is the continuation of Foro Romano. Here you can see some churches rebuilt from ancient temples. And here we have Foro Caesar. Once upon a time there was a temple here, but nothing remains of it, only fragments. And these columns apparently survived from some more ancient temple. There are a great number of such columns in Rome, both with flutes and without, as we see here. And there is a wonderful fragment of some kind of beam above the columns. It looks like here was a magnificent temple here. And these are simply incredible elements up close. And here, by the way, is another column. I accidentally went into some Roman courtyard, and there just stood a column. And this is not the only such example, since the city of Rome now stands on the ruins of the antediluvian city of Rome, destroyed long time ago by the great flood. And here again the colonnades. This is now called Piazza Foro Troiano. In general, the gods loved columns very much. They loved beauty. Then the Romans took advantage of this and tried to somehow restore them. And let's try to imagine what it was for initially. They probably had gardens rather than temples here. Although who knows? A very strange structure, a colonnade, a beam above, and more colonnades on the top. And some columns here are still standing in the ground. Or rather, there are many such columns here, buried 4 or 5 meters deep. Like here. But here in some places there was even deeper backfill. In general, they built on a grand scale. Here we see columns that have already been restored with bricks. This is obviously Roman work. Now the columns are simply filled with concrete, but back then they somehow inserted bricks there. They did it in a very interesting way, although in principle bricks was the main building material for the Romans. We approach to Trajan's column, but it's not even this column that is interesting, since it was already made by the Romans, like everything else we see here made of bricks. And what is interesting is the column simply a gigantic column. This is a solid piece of granite, and an incredibly huge capital. I have only seen such huge capitals in Turkey and Baalbek. Unfortunately, I haven't been there by myself, but such a huge capital is incredible. There are many other buildings in Rome, in the base of which you can see travertine, which was used by the gods. Apparently, their temples were once here, and these foundations formed the basis of these Catholic churches. And once these were temples, let's say pagan, or more precisely of the gods who ruled Rome, and not just from the word of God, but directly. And here we already approach the temple of Fortuna del Gioro Presente. Such a long name, basically it's of course a rebuilt villa on some more ancient foundation. Here people used marble for the floors. Of course, it's laid crookedly. Apparently they took it from the Colosseum or some other ancient structure. The columns were probably dredged in too, and then they built it from bricks. They laid bricks between the columns. Well, in general, they didn't do a great job here. And again, everything appeared under a huge backfill. It looks like Rome needs to be demolished to completely expose all these ancient buildings. And thanks for watching. Subscribe to the channel to see new discoveries.